Hello, and welcome to a special Tulsa World Let's Talk virtual town hall. I'm Wayne Greene, editorial pages editor of the Tulsa World, and our online town hall series is graciously underwritten by the George Kaiser Family Foundation. Today I'm joined by Mayor G.T. Bynum, who announced a few hours ago that he would allow his citywide shelter order made in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to lapse next Friday as Governor Kevin Stitt's plan to reopen the Oklahoma economy gradually begins. With spacing and mask requirements, restaurants and movie theaters will be able to go back into indoor operations, as will churches. Mayor Bynum, it was clear at your press conference, at least to me, that you were not completely comfortable with easing off the COVID-19 restrictions, but you didn't feel like you had a lot of choice. How close a call was this for you, and what factors were pulling you in the opposite direction?
Well, it was a very difficult decision to make because that all along, it's been very important to me that we follow federal guidelines. We've done that throughout this response following the CDC. And then last week, the White House issued their guidelines for communities to follow in beginning these phased rollbacks to re-engage their economy. And, on the one hand, we have data from the State Department of Health saying that as a state, Oklahoma has met those benchmarks. But we also hear from the Tulsa Health Department that locally, while our hospitals are in a much better position and our hospitals meet those benchmarks at a federal level, when it comes to test cases, and in particular having a 14-day downward trajectory, that does not apply to us in Tulsa. In fact, the latest data from the Tulsa Health Department as of this morning is that we're on an upward trajectory. So it was difficult because I was cognizant of the fact that we are not in the place where we wanted to be when we started rolling things back in Tulsa. But the challenge presented to us in the last 72 hours is that the state of Oklahoma, by initiating these rollbacks, has really encouraged communities in every direction around us and in our own metro area to follow suit with those relaxed social distancing practices, which causes us here in Tulsa, puts us in the position of either saying, we're going to go ahead and keep shelter in place here. Meanwhile, everyone that lives in the surrounding areas around us has relaxed their practices and is still coming into our community and bringing that virus with them. But we're going to ask somebody who's been out of work for 6 weeks to continue being unemployed while that phenomenon is occurring. Or we can tell that person who has really shouldered tremendous sacrifice in the last 6 weeks, and a person for whom every day that we wait to allow them to go back to work matters for them and their ability to pay for their family's livelihood. The decision for me became one of, if we're going to try and be the last people holding the leak in the dam while everyone else is left, that puts people in Tulsa and asks them to make a tremendous sacrifice that will not lead to the outcome they're making that sacrifice for. I didn't think that was a fair position to put Tulsans in, and so I agreed to move ahead with falling in line with the state's rules effective on May 1.
So among the hard decisions you've had to make as mayor, have any been any harder?
The only day that I can liken today to is the day when we instituted the restaurant closure. And that one, it was different in nature because on that day it was absolute confidence that we were doing the right thing, but knowing that doing the right thing would hurt people. And today, it's a matter of feeling like, we were largely painted into a corner on this one, and are having to make a decision that may be good for Oklahoma overall, but in this case, the numbers don't line up for it being the right time for Tulsa. And so my the hard part of today is knowing how much people have sacrificed in the last 6 weeks to protect their neighbors, and just hoping that it's been enough to keep us in the right place moving forward.
What would you have had the governor do differently if the state as a whole is within the White House guidelines, and I guess Oklahoma City is in the White House guidelines? Could you realistically ask him not to act the way he did?
Well, I think that the challenge here, which is a natural one, is that he and I have different jobs. His job is to watch out for the state overall. And if you look at the state overall has met those gating criteria and can move forward. My job is to protect people in Tulsa. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases where those two very admirable goals for people in different jobs didn't necessarily align. But again, my focus has been on what needs to be done here in Tulsa and when it needs to be done. And the goal for us was to follow the guidance of the Tulsa Health Department and identify when would be best to roll these back. But kind of been left on the field here and put in a position where if we continue to ask great sacrifice of people locally, they're doing so without being able to make the impact that they would be wanting to make that sacrifice for, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. As I understand, you and Mayor Holt had a conversation with the governor late Tuesday night ahead of his Wednesday announcement. How tense was the atmosphere in that conversation?
Well, the conversation on Tuesday night was very positive because the governor was calling to let us know that he'd decided to develop statewide guidelines. And I think both Mayor Holt and I have seen the complications and the problem of trying to patch together regulations city by city across the state when we were ramping up social distancing initiatives to slow the spread of this virus. And so, I think he and I both wished that the state would have taken action then and had a uniform standard across all communities across the state, and not given one community that chose to be more reckless an economic advantage over those that were trying to protect their citizens from a public safety or public health standpoint. So when he told us from a substantive standpoint, here are the things we're going to do, and we're looking at industry by industry guidelines that they should follow to have a safe relaunch, that was all very positive. I think the challenge came really more on the timing side. And Oklahoma City and Tulsa are different in this particular instance because Oklahoma City, their data shows that they've met the White House gating criteria just like the state has. So they're in a different position than we are in Tulsa. He and I both, asked the governor for some information. We spoke again with the governor on Wednesday morning before he made his speech, and I would say that one was maybe not as amicable as the call on Tuesday night, but that was largely around this idea of opening things up on Friday. That was not something that I think a lot of people were expecting, or that a lot of people had good arguments behind. But overall, I'd say that second conversation was a little more challenging.
Speaking of the order that allowed personal care facilities with appointments and no waiting rooms and so on, the masks to reopen starting today as we're speaking, is the governor's guideline on that in effect in Tulsa, or is it superseded by the city's by your executive order?
So it is not in effect, and I'm glad you asked that because that's led to a lot of confusion. It is not in effect in Tulsa. Now, the governor in his orders to date have been around essential and non-essential businesses, and this has been a common point of confusion. The governor under that can tell whatever businesses he wants to reopen. What our focus on the city level has been around what are essential activities for the customers to be participating in. And we're still under a shelter-in-place order in Tulsa through April 30th. And as I've said before, the standard guideline on that is that if it's not necessary for your health or survival, then, or it's deemed essential work for you to be doing at your job, then you should be at home. That applies through April 30th. So taking your dog to the groomer and getting your nails done and your haircut is not necessary for survival and is therefore not something that is allowed in Tulsa until April 30th. And then on May 1st, we'll join the rest of the state, including Oklahoma City, in shifting over those statewide guidelines.
Yeah, I'm walking, talking proof that you can survive without getting a good haircut. Mayor, you said before that whatever decision you made about reopening the city would be guided pretty strictly by what Bruce Dart at the Tulsa Health Department told you. Is he completely on board with this? I noticed when you were talking at today's press conference that he was nodding his head when you were talking about the difficulty of Tulsa being an island in this situation. But are you guys completely in agreement on this move?
I wouldn't say that Dr. Dart is ecstatic about us having to shift away from what we've been doing before we meet those federal criteria, nor am I. I think he is understanding of the position that we've been put in Tulsa by the entire state surrounding us, shifting over and rolling back their social distancing practices, and some of even our suburban communities in the Tulsa Metro announcing that they're doing that. And so he recognizes that, we're not, virus doesn't pay attention to the municipal boundaries and the position that we were put in. But I think he was hoping that we could get some more time to be able to drive this down further and actually meet that federal standard. And so was I. But the position I'm in, as you and I have discussed so far on this visit, is that I can't see a path where us continuing to keep those restrictions in place will yield the outcome that would merit asking Tulsans to make those sacrifices. And so that's why I decided to move forward with the approach that we are.
Did you get a chance to talk to the suburban mayors before they made their decision yesterday?
Yes, we had a call yesterday and spoke with each of them. And, a number of our suburbs, I get it. I think Bixby's had 14 cases. It's hard to tell your entire city that they've got to stay shut down for a month when 14 people in your entire city have had a virus. So I get that. That's maybe, I understand the position they're in. And just like I am in Tulsa, or the governor is for the state of Oklahoma, each of the mayors in our suburban communities are having to make a decision based on what they think is the right thing to do for their community.
So what would it take for you to reimpose a shelter order on the city? I mean, what sort of move in a metric would make you say, I've got to act again?
Well, one of the things that the governor assured Mayor Holt and I on during our call with him is that the state will be tracking their data regularly. And if they start to see a flare up, that they will halt rollbacks and take whatever action is necessary to address that kind of outbreak. And so I appreciate him saying that, and we'll be tracking the same data. He gets more data than I do from a statewide standpoint. But I think the situation you described, where if I felt like we had an outbreak in Tulsa and for some reason the state wasn't responding to it, then I would feel the need to take action. That's basically the position that I was in at the outset of this pandemic. We saw what could possibly occur if we did nothing. We didn't find the state taking the necessary action to protect Tulsans, and so we took action locally. And so did my colleagues in the metro area, and so did Oklahoma City and Norman, and pretty much every major city in the state of Oklahoma. So I'll keep that and reserve that right moving forward. But my hope is that at this point, the state has a much better testing regime in place than they did 6 weeks or even 4 weeks ago that'll allow them to monitor that and to respond accordingly if if a problem arises.
There are flare-ups and then there are flare-ups. So, I mean, we know that as a result of this reopening of society, that there will be more people infected, more people hospitalized, and I'm gonna have to say, probably more people die as a result. That's the basic virology of it. What's your tolerance point on this? Have you thought about that?
Oh, sure. And for me, I think that the big thing, there's two key sources of information here for me throughout this event. There's the Tulsa Health Department, which is doing such a good job in testing and in contact tracing. Long before everybody was talking about how important that was, they were doing that with the very first case that hit Oklahoma, and they've done it with all of the cases that have hit Tulsa County since that time. But they're doing that kind of work. But our hospital systems here in Tulsa, I'm also in regular communication with their leadership for each of those hospital systems to monitor how they're doing from a capacity standpoint, from a protective equipment standpoint, and from a personnel standpoint. And that's one of the other factors that we haven't really talked about on this call, but that was incredibly important to me, was getting the latest update from each of our hospital systems yesterday, and each of those leaders telling me, Mayor, we have a strong degree of confidence in our capacity at the hospital, in our hospitals right now. A month ago, we did not have, we might have had a couple days worth of protective equipment. Now we have weeks of supply in stock. So I'm going to continue to stay in touch with our hospital systems. And if all of a sudden they start telling me that they're concerned about an uptick and they may not be able to have the ability to manage that, then we will put orders back in place that, again, the original purpose of those orders were to protect our healthcare system's ability to handle this moving forward. That doesn't stop on May 1st. That's the same concern moving forward as it was back in late March.
If you had not gotten those assurances from the hospital leadership, would you have been willing to, would you have extended the shelter order?
Yes.
Yeah,
if they had told me that they were maxed out and there was a concern about a larger spread, then we would have extended it. And but I also think, they're telling me they've seen a 3-week at this point, some of them 3 weeks, some of them 2, decline in hospitalizations for COVID patients to a significant degree. And also, I want to give the governor credit here. To be fair to him, he's repeatedly said that one of the driving factors for him has been hospital capacity statewide. And so I'm confident the state will continue to monitor that too.
So as a patriotic Tulsan, what should I do on May 1st? Because I'm confused. Should I stay at home, stay sheltered, keep occasionally going to a restaurant and getting curb service? Or should I put on a mask, go eat in a restaurant, go back to work at my downtown office? What's the right way? How do you want us to behave on May 1st?
So if you look at the federal guidance on phase 1, it's really helpful, and it's one of the reasons that I recommended today that people check it out, because it applies both for employers and individuals. But the things they talk about in that is, if you have the ability to remote work in phase 1, you should continue to do that. Everyone should wear a mask in public. And again, that the value of the mask is not to prevent you from getting the virus. The purpose of the mask is to reduce your ability to spread the virus if you don't realize you already have it. The virus is largely transmitted through aerosolized droplets coming out of your mouth while you're talking or breathing or yelling. And having that mask in place can serve as a guard for those. So people, what I'm encouraging people to do, and what our team at the city is going to do, is continue to remote work in this phase 1. to the greatest degree possible, continue those social distancing practices that have worked so far. I mean, we want this to be the purpose of doing it in phases is that it's a gradual return to normal where we can slowly, keep check on the impact that it's having on the spread of the virus and on necessary hospitalizations, and make sure that we're keeping that capacity for our hospitals in check. So, it depends on the person, but, a big thing, I heard from a lot of people who feel very strongly, and they're usually in one of two camps. There's the people who feel like we should just keep doing this for a long time. And most of those people who tell me that are people like Wayne, like you and I imagine, who have the ability to remote work and can continue to draw a paycheck remote working. The people who I hear from who have been so anxious to be able to re-engage the economy are the people who are out of work because we have made it unlawful for them to go to work or for their business to be open and serving customers. And so we want that latter category to be able to re-engage with their employers and their businesses and start that gradual return to normal.
Mayor, I want to give you an opportunity to make any final comments, any thoughts that you'd like to offer. I appreciate your willingness, your generosity with your time today. Any last words you want to share?
I think two things. I think the one thing from a cautionary note that I'd remind everyone is that the virus is not in decline and it isn't evaporating on the 1st of May. And so it is very important for all of us to remain diligent and vigilant and keep practicing social distancing as best we can moving forward. We're moving into, on May 1st, I think, a new phase where we have, life as we knew it in February, which is what we hope is at the other end of this event. And then we have what we've all been going through for the last 4 to 6 weeks, which is a severe lockdown and restriction of what we're able to do. And we realize that until a vaccine is readily available, which isn't going to happen anytime in the immediate future, we're going to have to find ways of going about our daily lives that are somewhere in between those two polar opposites. And that's what, starting May 1st, we really start venturing into. And I think it's important we do that with caution, which is why I'm so supportive of doing it in gradual phases and testing rigorously throughout that. The other thing I would say is that I hope Tulsans appreciate that the sacrifices they've made in the last 6 weeks, based on all the data points that I have seen from our public health professionals, those data points indicate that Tulsans have saved thousands of lives in the last 4 to 6 weeks by their sacrifices. Unfortunately, those are lives of people who don't know to thank anyone because they just never contracted the virus. Its spread was slowed, and someday, if that person gets the virus, the healthcare provider will be there to give them the help they need because of sacrifices that Tulsans made over the last 4 to 6 weeks.
Right. Well, the people who were urging the sheltering movement said that if it worked right, people would claim that they had overreacted. So
I can very clearly recall a conversation I had with my wife at the outset of this when we had just started shelter in place, and I'd received just days before the numbers from the Tulsa Health Department on projected contagion through August and potential death rates. And as I told her, the best case scenario here is that people will say that we totally overreacted because they didn't ever get sick and they didn't die. And I'll take that best case scenario every day over what could have been if we hadn't acted early and acted in such a community-wide way.
Thank you for your time today. Mayor Bynum. Thank you too to our viewers today and to the George Kaiser Family Foundation for its generous sponsorship of our Tulsa World Let's Talk virtual town hall series. I'm Wayne Greene, editorial pages editor of the Tulsa World. Goodbye for now.